with how they see fit and what they experience being pepper sprayed by the New Haven Police Department on May 31st. So it would have been, I think, kind of crazy to have everyone give individual responses to these reporters at such last minute notice. So it just kind of, some folks suggested jumping on a Zoom. I want to appreciate and just thank everyone for getting on the Zoom. And Tom, Dave, I don't know how you all want to do it, but I figured you maybe have some initial framings or questions. And then I don't know if we want to respond one by one on some level. And then maybe, I don't mind giving a more targeted answer toward the end, but I prefer to let people respond because some folks have time, need to, get off the call because it's so late. So I just want to name that. And if anyone needs to jump off in particularly fast, it may be best you speak first, but maybe Tom, Dave, Thomas, you can kind of get some general thoughts that you want from folks and we can begin to respond. I'm trying my best, y'all. I hope I'm doing good. I'm gonna mute now.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Carrie. And thank you everyone for showing up to this and for being up, for sharing your stories and for talking with us as reporters. It's vitally important for us to talk to you about your experience and your reaction. So really appreciate it. I think there are enough people on the call that I really would not like everyone to respond to every question, if that's okay. Just kind of hop in when you feel like you have something to say, and it'll be awkward and you may talk over to someone, and we'll just use our best to respond to social cues. So the first thing I would love to ask is if can people just kind of talk about how it felt to be pepper spray, that moment where the police deployed pepper spray on May 31st. Just going back to that moment, what was it like physically, kind of emotionally? I know that's diving into the deep of a pretty intense moment, but that's what's being interrogated right here. So what was it like in that moment?
I don't mind starting off. My name is Lindsay Buchanan. Shortly before the police officers did pepper spray us, they had called, the organizer had called for white folks to come towards the front. I think that they were suspecting that the situation may be escalating a little bit. And so myself and many others went up to stand in the front, and they were announcing that we were intending on entering the public building. In my experience, I didn't even take a step forward, and without warning, I was hit in the face with pepper spray. And it was cold, and it was jarring and shocking, and felt like a very I had a heavy moment of like, did that really just happen? Because it felt like it came out of nowhere. I was immediately in pain. I was immediately kind of scooped and rushed towards the back, where I was met by some individuals with water, with milk. It felt like an immediate breach of trust, and just from my own experience, between like myself and police officers who in the experience of my life had been there to protect me. So a very huge breaking moment in that regard. Yes.
Anyone else got any thoughts on what it was like to be pepper sprayed?
Yeah, folks, going. I'm gonna wait. I want everybody to have their floor to say it. So don't feel like y'all need to wait in line or anything. Just jump in.
I was in the back. I actually stepped away. I can't remember if I stepped away to call Senator Looney or call Mayor Elicker, but I stepped back a couple of steps and turned my back to the back of the steps and was on the phone. And then I heard the chaos behind me and walked forward, and I started to get hit, and police were literally pushing people down the stairs, spraying it in people's faces as people were trying to turn back and go down the stairs. And I was going forward, and some people tried to pull me from going forward. And my thought was maybe somebody sensible would know me and see me and tell police to stand down. But police were pushing people down the stairs and pepper spraying them. And I can't think of, and I didn't see any escalation that would lead to that level. So uh, I'm gonna let other people talk, but frankly, I'm disgusted to see what was put out today, um, especially after having private conversations about this. Uh, I hate the politics of what's going on, especially when we're having serious conversations about what policing should look like and what potentially defunding the police would look like to try to control the narrative uh, without restorative justice is actually really disrespectful. So I'm gonna just leave it at that and let other people speak.
So,
Hey,
oh,
oh, go
so
ahead.
my name's Seamus. I was on in the second line of people of white people that were caught up, and I just remember on the first I saw someone on the first line step across the rope barrier, and the second they did that, the police immediately just went full assault, shoving us all back. I remember like one maybe in the corner of my eye, I saw like a water bottle or two thrown over from the back, and then after that, the mace came out, and then just chaos. That's about as much as I can really remember of it.
Hey, this is Gretchen Raffa, and I'm a resident of New Haven and representing myself. I have so much I want to say about that night, and I haven't even watched all the press conference today, but it was the first time I've ever been pepper sprayed, not the first time that I've encountered aggressive police at a protest in New Haven, but it was the first grade, and actually got, only on one side of my foot was behind the person. I don't remember who was in front behind the person that got sprayed in front of me, who was getting, forced down the stairs, and she tripped into me. And I like stumbled down the stairs as I got sprayed. And I think I was in shock mostly because the event itself was, I think, a beautiful demonstration of what community looks like when we're organized, and watching how well organized folk and the Black queer women that were leading the crowd when things, kind of got tense, or, there was de-escalation so beautifully demonstrated by protesters. To see that escalation by the cops and the pepper spray and the riot gear come out, I think I was in shock when I got hit. Couldn't believe what the fuck just happened, because all I heard, Carrie would calling me up front and telling white people to go up front, and so I did what she said, and I think I just was kind of numb at that point, because I was really floored that the mayor and the police chose to escalate in such and I'm sorry, I got some emotions because of what's happening, in the U.S. Senate right now. What just happened, and that, like, again, that the mayor had the power to actually de-escalate and was to escalate the situation and harm peaceful protesters. And I do not believe water bottles and battery packs, if they were thrown, they don't kill, they don't harm. Police guns and violence do. And all I saw in that moment was escalation and not de-escalation. And I'm sorry, my thoughts are a little bit all over the place because I'm fired up today.
Well, thank you all for sharing those answers. I do want to ask another question as well, is when you guys did hear that the police justified, say that their investigation resulted that this was justified after reviewing body cam footage, after reviewing footage from the crowd that they found on social media, reviewing reports, what is your thoughts hearing that this was a justified use of force?
So I'll start to respond and y'all chime in. Dave, that's a little inaccurate. The police department and the mayor, in less than 24 hours of them escalating violence on us as protesters, said that they were justified in their use of force less than 24 hours after the violence happened. And there was no documents, no use of force report, nothing to substantiate the mayor, who was not present, who was inside the building, we actually went to that building because the mayor made a public tweet stating he was at the police building. So to get back to your question, we'll get back to the point around the mayor publicly announcing he was at a public building. He said the force was justified within 24 hours without any documents, without any investigation, without anything. And all that they've done since then is craft and construct a narrative without substantiating any of these claims. So if they showed you all evidence of everything that they gave reason for why they pepper sprayed us, I believe there were like 3 different reasons. There was no evidence to substantiate that. So that's, one, there's never any evidence to substantiate violence. That's the problem with policing in America, that violence is always justified, specifically when it comes to Black and brown communities or communities standing up against police violence in unity. So that's kind of my first answer. There's layers to that, but I'll let other folks jump in on that. But the fact that they had substantiated that or didn't substantiate that this was justified less than 24 hours after the event, I believe speaks to the problem of the state and its support of violent policing. The mayor didn't demand any footage at that time. The mayor didn't demand any evidence. He just came out and stated it was justified. And he also brought along community leaders who were misled at the press conference the following day that I was told. Robin Porter was misled to come to that press conference, and other Black leaders to shame the organizers, the Black and queer and brown organizers who helped to hold that space at the police station for 12 hours. So I'll shut up and let folks chime in, but they had justified it less than 24 hours after the event without anything, without any bit of evidence. And that's how police violence functions, right? As soon as a matter of violence happens in our community by police, it's justified. There's no actual reporting or no thorough investigation before it's justified. And those things follow after to how do you say, to go in alignment with their justification, with their said justification.
Thanks for that, Carrie. My answer to you, Dave, sort of ties in my answer to you, Tom, with your question. So in my watching of the press conference, I think what I see the police department doing is sort of talking about how they were trying to promote safety that day because water bottles were thrown because of COVID-19 and access to the building. An alleged knife in the crowd was something that I heard them say, sort of an allegation that one of the protesters vandalized the Bridgeport Police Department the night before. And I think for me, it really begs the question, like, who or what safety were they prioritizing? And I think if we're talking about safety and times when I felt safe that day, to what Gretchen was saying, I felt safe when the protest started, I think at around noon, and watched the leaders of Black Lives Matter sort of guide hundreds of people safely throughout New Haven streets. I think actually the protest wasn't even organized by them initially, and they really gracefully took it over because they have expertise in guiding folks safely through the streets. I felt safe when I watched them slow down for the crowd of older folks so they could join, distribute water and food, allow folks to express emotion while remaining focused. I didn't feel safe when we came to the police department and we weren't met with our mayor, but we were met with a line of police officers who were armed. I didn't feel safe when, Mayor Elliker, our mayor, that, people voted for, supported for, people rely on, need, didn't come out to be with his people. And then I didn't feel safe, of course, when I was pepper sprayed in the eyes and I couldn't navigate my way down the stairs. Someone had to help me down the stairs. I'm sure sounds like folks tripped and fell. I'm glad I didn't. And then to your question, Dave, I think there are a lot of things that really concern me about the report. And I think One of the most concerning things is how the report mentions an allegation that a leader of the New Haven protest committed vandalism the evening before the Bridgeport Police Department, and that was sort of the impetus for their response. And so one, it sounds like that's not true, or definitely hasn't been proven to be true. And given that it's just such a serious and like historically serious allegation that affects people's opinion of the Black Lives Matter movement, people have been using false claims against activists for years in the civil rights movement as well, to discredit activists, to discredit the movement. And I think on a personal level that I don't want to see people and leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement be hurt as a result of allegations like that. And I don't want also the Black Lives Matter movement as a whole to be negatively impacted as a result of really careless allegations. And so my fundamental question with regards to the report is, what proof do they actually have that a New Haven protest organizer committed vandalism the evening before at the Bridgeport Police Department that seemed to be the fundamental basis for their response at the New Haven Police Department?
I want to, if I could take a moment to follow that up, and I might, be going on my own here. I want to be clear that I'm not speaking for anybody else here. Like Carrie said, we are here sharing our honest opinions. I think some of us are hearing this from each other for the first time as well. So I just want to be clear in that. But, I, as a few of you know, I sit on the Hampden Legislative Council with Justin. Justin is on that council as well. And we've seen enough of these internal affairs investigations by various towns, by the state, by other entities, and they are all the same. And I want to be clear in what tonight was. Tonight was an attempt to gaslight and intimidate activists. It was not an attempt. It was not a fact-finding mission. It was not an attempt to find the truth or to find justice or to move forward in an appropriate way with the community. It was an attempt to gaslight and intimidate protesters. And I can back that up by saying they made a threat on their press conference this evening that they were going to arrest somebody in that crowd. They didn't say who that was. They didn't show video. So now you have a blank check that they have put forward saying we're going to arrest a protester. We're not going to tell you what that is or who that's for. That's a major problem. That is a violation of the First Amendment at just debate. We're not even talking about other issues. On the most basic level, that is a violation of the First Amendment that Chief Reyes this evening was saying that he worked so hard to support. And there's one other thing that I want to put, before I allow time to move on. At about 6 minutes and 30 seconds into the press conference this evening, Chief Reyes says that we were allowed to stay outside of the police department, and that to me is just a complete falsehood. They were standing outside then and later in the evening making threats to arrest protesters for standing on the curb. This was again an attempt to intimidate, an attempt to show protesters what can happen when we speak out for justice. And tonight was the same thing, except they had the backing of the mayor tonight, whereas the mayor was nowhere to be found on that evening in May. And I'll let others speak because I know I see some others who want to speak. Thank you.
I'm just gonna hop on that where, I have a ton of respect for Captain Duff, but in the aftermath of him being shot last year, you had tanks rolling through Newhall. I remember trying to get home, seeing tanks in my community because one person was shot. A couple of weeks ago, shots went through my window and I didn't see tanks. I didn't see anybody concerned the same way that they were when they had a SWAT team out there in Newhall in the aftermath of having a shooting that happened between two police departments where New Haven Police Department wasn't found. I did a one-on-one conversation as elected officials talking about how we were going to move forward past this. Carrie already talked about how, the press conference that happened at the police substation in Newhall, that's maybe 4 blocks from my house. I remember pulling up, sweating and pissed. And the chief didn't say anything. Everybody was avoiding me that day. This was the day after the protest. Everybody was avoiding me because they knew what I had to say. So I'm really disgusted, not only to make an empty threat to people organizing and practicing their First Amendment, but I'm more disgusted that we are in a crisis right now. Mayor Elicker showed leadership throughout the state for months throughout the COVID crisis in a way that he put New Haven on the map and a leader in the state. And now he has shown that there is not leadership on the issue of police brutality, on talking about criminal justice reform, or in fact, the promise to defund the police. When we are talking about stuff in this context, it has diverted the whole entire conversation, not only for New Haven, but for the whole entire state. We have just changed the narrative and conversation from New Haven being the city making these decisions, talking about how to move forward, deficits that perpetuate and mostly harm Black, queer, indigenous people of color. Like we know these are the things. So as an elected official, as we are 8 days away from election, talking about what President Trump is doing and how we want to see leadership at the national level. At the regional level, I want to see leadership. It has been 2 or 3 years, and as one of the only elected officials who's talked about gun violence and talk about police brutality, I am tired of politicians dodging issues when it's comfortable and then not talking about whether it's violence in our communities or it's police violence. I and my colleague have been there. We've been talking about these issues, but everybody was quiet. Mayor Elicker was able to be there when Suleiman was murdered, but when it came to talking to the community and answering the phone when people were outside, instead, people were threatened with a noise instrument to disperse people, and people were pepper sprayed. And tonight, people were threatened with state sanctioned violence by police as we have our communities fearing ICE coming into our communities, as we have people who have been afraid for months with police brutality, and frankly, with the recent rash of crimes going on, if we're supposedly supposed to trust the police to keep us safe, making broad, vague statements against people talking about the changes that they want to see is not a way to foster community and community sense of camaraderie and community policing, if there is such a thing. So I'm gonna keep myself quiet for the rest of the night because otherwise I'll just go on a tangent.
And I just want to add to your question too, on top of what Justin's saying, Dave. The day before, so I want to correct, the chief says that the protest was in response to George Floyd. The protest was a clear protest to call for an end to police violence and for police accountability locally right there in New Haven, where just a few days prior, a man was assaulted in Walmart by police officers over an allegation of a petty theft. Again, an allegation, nothing that was proven. So before anything was proven, he was met with physical brute force by multiple officers. So there was already actions organized at the mayor's house a few days before, if you will, the larger protests, where we were calling for justice for that individual and for other individuals, and calling for officers on the New Haven police force that are actively violent to be discharged and for the mayor to do something, right? And to bring it back to Monday's event, I forget, was that Memorial Day, the day before or a few days before, the New Haven Police Department released a video saying that they were against police violence and put a call out nationally to police officers to end police brutality. So when you ask how we feel about them justifying police brutality, a few days after they said and called police departments to action, they held a press conference calling nationally police departments to action to end police brutality. And then uses the how do you say, I don't know, a poorly unsubstantiated claim of premeditation to then meet families and children, people who are out there for their first time at protests, and to meet those people with a swath of pepper spray, pushing and shoving people, threatening to arrest them multiple times. So when you say, how do we feel about the justification, or how do I feel about the justification, I think it's mighty ironic that this department a few days prior puts a call out to end police violence and then justifies their police violence a few days later.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And first, I want to say that I'm afraid I only have about 5 more minutes that I'll be able to stick on. So I apologize if I have to leave before this is over, but just a heads up, I'll have 5 more minutes. And if I may ask one more question to the group, what would you have liked to have seen from the police on May 31st when you all arrived at police headquarters? And what would you have liked to see from them today at the chief's, stated conclusion of the internal investigation into that incident?
This is Gretchen. If I don't want to talk again, if someone else wants to speak up, but I'll talk. I think, what I think is coming up for me as people are talking is like, gaslighting is a perfect, thing to kind of summarize this, because the day of, I feel like it was, 7, 8 hours, maybe longer than that, standing on the front line, like the emotional and psychological manipulation of the cops. I mean, it was a conscious use of power. The mayor chose to stay in that building. The mayor chose, maybe someone else directed him to do this, chose to send out a tweet. It was a conscious use of his power and the power dynamics and how he consciously used his power to escalate and create tension. Like, it was a perfect, I'm saying a perfect demonstration. But standing there on the front line, as someone that was standing in front of someone that was 6 feet tall or higher with a shield and riot gear, who refused to look at me, refused to answer questions. It was just like, that was kind of the micro of what was happening on the macro level of the mayor being inside, knowing what was happening, purposely using his power to escalate, while the protesters were calmly, and I'm saying calmly because at many points he could see that we were sitting down, singing, chanting, lifting up and elevating people's stories and their pain of police violence. I think what happened today was another example of him consciously using his power. And it's a week out from the election. As someone that's doing, policy work and electoral work, all I can think about was, is he trying to, manipulate us in the social justice movement in New Haven to say, we're watching you, and like threatening to arrest someone. It feels very much like watching power in action and like using his power consciously to intimidate and manipulate people that, again, are exercising their right to protest.
Yeah,
and all it does is break trust, because I feel like it just completely, any trust that was there, that was completely trust breaking and not trust building.
I'd like to more or less echo what Gretchen is saying, that how I felt hearing them explain the justification was like their story started right at the moment right before the pepper spray was deployed, but really the story started at noon when, like Caroline was saying, Black Lives Matter organizers showed up to protest they didn't know about probably like a day before, and led over 1,000 people through the streets in a safe manner, waited for people to catch up, timed it on the highway so it wasn't a full day shutdown, came to the police department, organized peacefully, organized speeches. There was plenty of speeches, like Gretchen was saying, lifting up stories for what felt like over an hour, maybe 2 hours of peaceful demonstrations and chanting and singing, with multiple people, myself included, like texting the mayor or calling the mayor and be like, come down here, like we want to speak with you. And there was just nothing, no response. And so it did not feel justified when you consider the whole story and the knowledge that the mayor had, that had he come out, we could have had a conversation.
I think what a lot of us would like to see, not only on May 31st, but in general, is a prioritization of people and community and family and lives over property and power structure. And I mean, that was one of the justifications, right? We wanted to protect our property. But again, don't forget that Mayor Elicker had publicly said, hey, Twitterverse, this is where I am, right? I am in a public building monitoring the situation. It was completely appropriate to want to have a conversation instead of do it over Twitter, right? I mean, it was done to protect property and to prevent a conversation with Mayor Elicker. And so for me, that's critical, because I think that shows the root of all of the issues, which is that we are prioritizing property and power structure over people and over lives and over justice. And that for me, when you ask me what I would have liked to see on May 31st, I would have liked to see Chief Reyes, I would have liked to see the leadership in the police department, and I would have liked to see Mayor Elicker prioritize the lives of the people on the streets that day instead of their property.
Going off of that, I would say, yeah, I would have liked to see them treat us like human beings. And I feel like if you see humans, if the normal response to seeing people like cry out in pain, cry out for the survival of their community, like request a conversation and actively chant, we are peaceful, we're here peacefully. I feel like the normal response to another human being is to ask questions, to want to have a conversation, to be present, not to show up in riot gear. And I just feel like the only way to justify the use of force and violence and inflicting pain on people that you're looking at in the face, people that you're seeing who are peaceful, the only way that can be justified is if you're not seeing them as human beings. And like Gretchen said, that's a micro example of like what's happening on a larger scale. But and in this, and wrapping it to tonight, that's what I would have liked to see be invoked in this press conference, is like, in any mention of what the experience was like for the people who were there that night and who experienced the pain, but that's just totally absent from their analysis, is the humans that were there, the people that were there, and our lives. And so yeah, just basic humanity is what I would have liked to see that night, instead of really treating us like animals that needed to be herded.
And Tom, this speaks to why we want the police defunded. We could be using monies from the city in ways to really build safe communities, and ways to really build educated communities, and ways to really build economically sound communities, as opposed to feeding into a force that is only really purpose in communities of color are to feed the prison industrial complex, and are to criminalize and scrutinize like teenagers, i.e., for instance, who've been criminalized this whole past season for issues like dirt bike riding, right? Kids being harassed in school and brutalized in school by school resource officers. A large part of why we went to the police department, again, was because I want to be clear that we wanted to go to Ellicker's house, right? So would we have been met right, with a force of people there, if we went on a public street to cry out to our mayor to demand change? I'm not sure. We probably would have anyway. Probably would have been pepper sprayed anyway, right? So we went intentionally to the police department because Elliker said, a public official made a public announcement that he was at a public building, and we went to that public place to express our public concern, and we were met with violence. And that speaks to the fact that what we've been seeing around this country is that police don't keep our communities safe, that police do prioritize property and white life over Black life and over communities of color, and that needs to change, and that the police cannot reform themselves, right? We need new systems. We need new revolutionary systems to keep our communities safe, not officials who intend to see us, to dehumanize us, and to use violence against us, and to justify it always at all costs.
I appreciate that answer there, Carrie. I too only have a couple minutes left. News at 10 starts in a little bit. My last question for anybody here is, the police had mentioned that they had worked with organizers of the event and future protests that happened in the city, which they said led to less violence in the future. Is anybody able to confirm that they at all worked with the police department to organize any future rallies or protests, or at least anybody here?
Dave, could you repeat that question again?
Sure. The police had said that in the future protests, they worked with organizers to plan those protests. By chance, did anybody here ever talk with police or work with them to organize any future protests?
No. And I believe they may be referring to Adis Castillo, who's the director of Citywide Youth Coalition. I would love to put you in touch with her so she could give her narrative, because the police are putting out a very one-sided narrative of what happened. What I believe happened is that they looked horribly in the press. They got global or national attention on some level. There were thousands of viewers who saw what happened, and they frankly felt embarrassed. Not because of what they did to us, but because of the shame they received. Because if no shame was received, there would have been no change, I believe. Right. So I believe that there's a change the following week in the follow-up protest. One, I know for a fact, that many thousands of people didn't come out or came out because they witnessed what happened the week prior. Right. So people are coming out and support to stand in solidarity with the community that was assaulted by the New Haven Police Department. One. And two, the police knew that it was probably best when you have a crowd of 5,000 people that you stand down. You don't win that fight. You can't pepper spray 5,000 people. So I think it was a very strategic public relations move where they said, oh, we had a hiccup. All of this was, we pepper sprayed, white people publicly, children publicly, right? People who don't fit the narrative of the criminal organizers that they try to make Black and brown queer organizers out to be, right? So I believe it was a rebranding to save their asses, frankly, excuse my language. And that's why they chose not to use force or not to show up with force. And let's be clear, there was force. There were people on top of the roofs. There were police officers surveilling the protests from the top of the roof. So I don't even want to jive with this narrative that they were peaceful with the people at the follow-up protests, because that's not the truth. We had surveillance, we had drones and surveillance going on during that protest. And I will put you in touch with Adis Castillo, Dave and Tom, so she can tell you her very clear side of the story. And I would not believe it'd be the point that she worked with Reyes. Reyes is misleading, again, the public and lying.
I think just to add to that, I just want to flag that there was a few of us organizers after being pepper sprayed who had a private meeting with Elliker. And in that meeting, we did make it very clear the following action that was going to be led by youth, right? And we were very clear in letting them know that we did not want police there, and that we felt that their presence would only make the environment hostile. It was the same meeting in which Elliker acknowledged, right, that the way he had handled the whole situation was not well, had claimed he would do an apology, which he didn't really do well. And so in that meeting, it was very clear to him that we did not want more police in our future actions. And so I agree with everything Carrie just said of the rebranding and how they were very strategic and how they moved forward, specifically after that conversation we had with Elliker regarding how the police behaved themselves on May 31st and what was not to happen again, especially when we were going to have youth leading that. And that was very clear, so they knew that.
Well, thank you, Vanessa and Carrie, and thank you everyone for talking with me. I'm afraid I have to go now, but if others can stay, I encourage you to. But thank you, Carrie, for organizing this, and thank you everyone for sharing.
Thank you, everyone. I don't know if folks have any extra sentiments before Tom jumps off. Alex, I know you didn't get to talk. I know, Tom, you got to get off, but if anyone wants to say like a last thing before Tom runs this article. Tom, what time do you plan on running the article?
Sometime tonight. I'm not sure. Hopefully in an hour and a half or two.
Okay.
Yeah, I was there on the front lines. I just thought it was very jarring. If you're not going to address this issue of police brutality, after that moment where Carrie had mentioned the New Haven Police Department put out a video of how they're taking a new oath against police brutality. And I just want to say it was literally the day before. So they released that video the day before we all got pepper sprayed on the same steps they were on. And it was just kind of jarring to have that happen to me. And then kind of, in my opinion, Elliker kind of just deflected or kind of brushed it under the rug. And it was just kind of I felt like he really had an opportunity and the city really had an opportunity to come together and actually address it at that moment. And that opportunity was met with riot shields and pepper spray. So that's just my little piece on that.
Anybody else?
Real fast, Tom, I just think it's incredibly insensitive of a police department, especially a police department that's historically situated in a Black and brown city, to use violence in a moment where there's a national outcry and people in literal grief at that police station. There was a woman at that police station whose beloved one was, I forget his name. It was one of the first cases in the beginning of the year where this person was murdered by one of the police departments surrounding our city who spoke there. There were people who were brutalized by police there. There was no empathy by this department to say in this moment, we should let these people outcry. And nobody wanted to go into the building. Let's be clear. We moved forward to go up to the building to call Elliker out. So if the police were so worried that their department was going to be broken into and vandalized, one, there was no evidence that any of that had happened or would happen. And if there was some intelligence that said something happened in Bridgeport, why wasn't anyone arrested? No one was arrested on May 31st and no one was arrested in Bridgeport. So all this crime happened and there's no one to account for what they alleged to say have happened, which I'm still confused about. So people took one single step forward and got met with pepper spray. In a moment where there's a national outcry, right, for justice. In a moment in a city where we've seen murder after murder from Malik Jones onto Jarrell Gibbs, onto Stephanie and Paul being shot at. So I think it's important to emphasize that this department doesn't have any cultural competence. And if they had any sensibility in that moment, they would have showed empathy to the people, Black and brown people and white allies who are out there in grief, not just from what we've been seeing nationally, but from the 30 plus murders we've seen in this state over the past 4 years by police interacting in our communities and escalating violence just like they did on May 31st. I know I spoke to, in the past few weeks, at least 4 mothers across the state who've lost their children to police murder. So that is the context, that is the energy that we went to that police department went to say that we want change, to go up to the door, to call Elliker out. And the fact that they just decided to be violent because they didn't want us there is not acceptable. And what I heard, just to push back, Tom, because Tom, you reported that a water bottle was thrown and then they pepper sprayed us. What I heard Rhea say clearly today, and what I saw on the video clearly today, was him saying they use force when people forcefully march forward. And all I see in the video, before anyone even marches forward, are police officers trying to push people back and walking up to them past the line that they drew and pushing people forward. And then as people decided to take peaceful step forward, no one pushed and shoved officers. People took a step forward to walk up to the door, to speak to call the mayor down. We were pepper sprayed and people were shoved down the stairs. Some people were, and children were pepper sprayed. It's completely absurd that we are in a state and in a city that is complicit, and a city that says it's complicit with that type of violence. And it only speaks to why shit in this country is burning down. It only speaks to that, because there's a political cost to doing nothing. And that's what the city continually says it will do. And that's what we've been seeing, the cost globally. We see it just in Nigeria. What the New Haven police did was not all that different from what the Nigerian police did. We were maybe a few steps away from being those protesters. Police violence is global. This state and there's a global sanctioning of law enforcement and its violence on community members. And then it's unacceptable that Mayor Elliker ran on a police accountability, platform. Mm-hmm. And looks to justify police violence. He's speaking out of both sides of his mouth. I'd like to say somewhere else, but I won't. I'm sorry, Tom, I'm done. I just want you to get that. Good. And Dave and Tom. Anyone else? I don't know. I know, Tom, you got to leave, but
I got to go. I'm going to sign off. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Tom. If anybody has any final words, I do have, the news in 5 minutes. But if anybody has anything else to say before we head out, this is the moment.
I think to add to what Carrie was saying, everything about the department, but also Elliker, the lack of empathy, right? Like there was families there that had been brutalized by New Haven police officers. And in the whole time that we were there and trying to get Elliker to come out, at one point when Elliker entertained the idea of coming out, he said he would only do so if we stepped down the stairs, right? So he wanted to be high up above while we were down, and that sent to us a message very clear, right, that Elliker saw us and was treating us no different than the police saw us and were treating us, right? Elliker from that moment saw his constituents, his community members as a threat. We could not be near him. He did not, and not because of COVID. He wanted us far down the steps because he felt that we were all a threat, though we had done absolutely nothing and had been brutalized. And so his response in that moment, right, the whole time that he refused to come out, or that he gave us these runarounds that he'll only come out if we step down because he's unsafe, this, that, and the third, or when he came out, his whole behavior that day and the lack of empathy completely shows to us is reflective of his refusal to actually really engage on this, right? When he's run on a platform, right, against police brutality, for the immigrant community, all these things that make him seem great. And when it comes time to have the real conversation to him, right? And when he's literally baiting us to come to him, and so we come to him to have the real conversation with him, he is nowhere. He does not want to come out. He does not want to engage. And then he sees us as a threat, treats us as so, and then lets the police do everything while he just stands inside and watches us, right? And then tells us he cannot engage with us because we are threatening. And so the whole behavior of Eliker, what I think to an earlier question, what I would have liked to see, to some extent, I'm not disappointed in what the police, in the press conference that happened today. I'm sure their values uphold and justify their actions, because again, we know what police is rooted in. I do expect differently of my mayor. I do expect differently of Eliker. I would have expected him to show more empathy. I would have expected him to do better that day, to be in conversation, and he chose not to. He does not seem to have a problem speaking to white Italian mobs who are angry with him, but he has a problem speaking to a community of Black and brown, poor working class folks who are also very angry, and more than angry, are grieving. We are grieving, and we were all saying that day that we were in pain, grieving, and still he could not come out and speak to us, right? And so that behavior is just, it tells us it's the reality that Eliker does not actually want to address these issues. And so when we bring it even to his doorstep weeks later, right, he calls us out, and we have his final response that he doesn't actually care about police brutality, that he's not actually going to do anything about it. And that he has a different perspective on it, which is of no use to the community because he has not been hearing us. So that's all I'm really gonna put out there for now.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, and thank you all for coming on. I do have to run, but I do really appreciate all your guys' time, and thank you for sharing, and thank you for inviting me and Tom as well to be able to tell us your story.
And Dave, just to give us an idea, when will you release, or will you release your story? Because you told me, but
yeah. So originally I was hoping to get it on the news by 10:10, but that's gonna be a little tight. So I'm probably gonna get it on closer to 11 o'clock tonight.
And then you'll say you'll do a story tomorrow?
That would be my hope, is to do a much larger story. I'm hoping to run like a little bite from this tonight to go with the small bite I have from the PD. And if they allow me to tomorrow, I'd like to do a bigger story and encompass more information and more of the stories that you guys have.
Thank you, Dave.
No problem. Thank you guys again. Appreciate it.
And thank you, everyone. And Thomas, I know you're still on the call. Thomas, did you have any follow-up questions?
No, that was, everything was covered. So, and thank you for everyone for being so open and passionate with your remarks and everything. My plan is to run a story tomorrow and get as much of the content that was discussed here tonight into the story as I can, because I do want to, I don't want to publish a story that's just Eliker's and Reyes' comments. So thank you all for commenting and speaking today.
And thank you, everybody. I know this was super unorganized. I hope this was worth y'all's time. I know y'all probably way better things y'all could be doing right now at 9, 10 o'clock at night.
I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Bye, Dave.